Shunned by Democrats and estranged from his family, RFK Jr. has long been desperate for validation. So desperate, in fact, that he has now joined forces with none other than Donald Trump. Of course, as the most prolific anti-vax conspiracy theorist in the country, RFK Jr.'s endorsement of Trump on Friday was a long time coming. And frankly, they have a lot in common. Both have enormous egos that definitely cloud their judgment. Both rely on misinformation to prey on people's fears. And both leverage their last name for their own self-interest. But for Kennedy, this also marks another act of rebellion against his own family and the institutions that they helped to build. So he may share the same name as his father, but he could not be more different. See, his dad, the real Robert Kennedy, was driven by a genuine concern for the health and welfare of the American people. He was a champion of the underprivileged and the vulnerable. He appealed to people's better angels, not their worst instincts. And when it came to modern medicine, he said those who with power and influence have a, quote, obligation of responsibility.
I think that, as I said at the beginning, I think the medical profession has made a major difference in the United States and will continue to make a major difference in the United States. But I think that we have to recognize, those of us who have the advantages that you have and that I have, that we have an obligation and responsibility to those who do not.
What Kennedy was saying there to a group of doctors in Indiana, that was the audience, that it's not enough to merely do no harm. He felt strongly that people in a position to help others have an obligation to do so. Needless to say, the apple has fallen pretty far from the tree. It's out of the orchard. RFK Jr. has not only failed in his obligation of responsibility, he's actually done the opposite. He's used his privilege and his name to encourage the most vulnerable Americans to turn their backs on modern medicine. He used falsehoods to stoke widespread fear of even routine vaccines, including the vaccines that eradicated measles, mumps, and polio. And now, if Trump and Kennedy have their way, parents will once again have to worry that their kids could be susceptible to life-threatening diseases at school. But here's the thing. RFK Jr. is not only insulting his family's legacy, he's also trying to sabotage the party that his family helped shape and influence for more than 6 decades. Remember, his endorsement comes just days after new reporting shows his candidacy was costing Trump more votes than Harris. Don't forget, RFK Jr.'s political ambitions were financed by Donald Trump's biggest billionaire donor. So by endorsing Trump, he's confirmed what we suspected all along, that his entire goal here was to be a spoiler for the Democratic ticket. Look, we still don't know what the real impact of this endorsement will be, and maybe, as Dan Pfeiffer just said, there isn't a big one at all. But what we do know is the headline should not read, Kennedy endorses Trump. They should read, dangerous conspiracy theorists join forces. RFK Jr. no longer represents the Kennedy family. He is the opposite of the legacy that his father, his uncle, his siblings, and cousins have tried to carry forward for decades. RFK Jr.'s endorsement of Donald Trump prompted a strongly worded response by members of his own family. On Friday, several of his siblings signed onto a family statement issued by his sister, Kerry Kennedy, saying, quote, our brother Bobby's decision to endorse Trump today is a betrayal of the values that our father and our family hold most dear. It is a sad ending to a sad story. Kerry Kennedy is a human rights activist and a lawyer. She's also Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s sister. Kerry, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to start. I mean, that was a very powerful statement, and I imagine it was pretty painful to have to do. But why do you feel so compelled to speak out at this moment?
You know, I think this is really the stakes this November couldn't be higher, which is exactly why my whole family will be fighting so hard to reelect Kamala Harris and Coach Waltz, who've been champions for the values that my family has fought for years. Donald Trump is the polar opposite. He's a threat to the most basic freedoms that are core to who we are as Americans, the right for women to control our bodies, the right to live in communities safe from gun violence, to love who you love. And I think if my dad were alive today, the real Robert Kennedy would have detested almost everything Donald Trump represents, his His lying, his selfishness, his rage, his cynicism, hatred, racism, fascist sympathies, deliberate misinformation about vaccines, criminal felony convictions. Daddy was the Attorney General of the United States. His rape of E. Jean Carroll, his contempt for the poor and suffering, for ethics, democracy, healing, his cruel sneering at human rights for suffering people in America and around the world. And these are the causes that was loved so passionately by the real Robert Kennedy. So I'm outraged and disgusted by my brother's gaudy and obscene embrace of Donald Trump. And I completely disavow and separate and dissociate myself from Robert Kennedy Jr. in this flagrant and inexplicable effort to desecrate and trample and set fire to my father's memory.
It is, and I imagine, again, incredibly painful given how much your family has done for so many decades. And I touched on that in my opening. I know you touched on that in your statement. I wanted to ask you about something J.D. Vance said about your brother's endorsement. He said, quote, he wishes he could see his grandmother's reaction to RFK's son and namesake, and let's be honest, the most authentic to his dad's legacy, endorsing the people's president, Donald J. Trump. What do you make of that?
You know, well, there is not much that J.D. Vance says that holds any water with me. I think what you need to do is people need to do is look at the facts. Wages are up in our country. Inflation is down. Small businesses are booming. Manufacturing jobs are coming back. Harris and Biden have capped the cost of insulin to $35 for those on Medicare, lowering prescription drugs and healthcare costs across the board. Student loan relief has reached nearly 4 million Americans. First bipartisan gun safety legislation in 30 years. And, you know, since 1989, there have been 51 million new jobs created in the United States, 51 million. 1 million by Republicans, 50 million by Democrats. So if you care about your children, you care about your grandchildren, there's only one way to vote in this election. And it is for Harris and Coach Walz.
Your brother was on Fox this morning, and he said he has a big family and that only a few are troubled by his actions. It doesn't seem that way from the statement, but you know your family well. What is your reaction to that?
So every single one of the people in my generation, except for Bobby and one cousin, are for all of us. All the rest of us are endorsing President Kamala Harris.